One first in which there was too much debt, leverage, and excessive risk-taking in the private sector, households, banks, financial institutions, even corporates. And now as a result of the resolution of the financial crisis, we had a surge of public debt and deficits. So historically, whenever you start with too much private and public debt, there is a painful period that can last over a decade where growth is going to be anemic. Why? You have to spend less, to save more or save less, to gradually reduce these stocks of deficit and debt. And that implies that economic growth has been very weak in the United States, in Europe, in Japan, and other advanced economies. And that's going to continue. And eventually, that slow economic growth is associated with rising unemployment and also with social and political unrest. That's the situation we're facing right now. Is unstable disequilibrium, is the new abnormal. We've had a decade now of very low economic growth.
But you don't see huge bubbles that are going to cause a worldwide financial recession.
Well, the policy response to the financial crisis, monetary easing, that has been zero policy rates, quantitative easing, credit easing, has boosted asset prices. They've gone higher and higher and higher, but has not led to a strong economic recovery. So over time, there is a gap between Wall Street that is doing well because these asset prices are rising, and Main Street, where economic growth in US, in Europe, in Japan, in emerging market is still very weak.
Is that because of the absence of demand or something else?
On one side, there is an absence of demand. That's part of the story. On the other side, there are structural problems of this economy that constrain supply. And then there is the burden of too much private and public debt that implies painful deleveraging. So in part, we needed monetary easing to try to avoid and prevent this great recession from becoming a great depression. But liquidity is a bit like a drug, it's a palliative. It doesn't resolve the disease. You have to do fundamental structural changes that are going to increase the productivity. For example, in Europe, if you don't do them, liquidity just buys you time, but creates zombie firms, zombie households, zombie countries and governments.
What fundamental structural reform are you talking about?
Well, it depends on the countries.
Okay.
In the case of Europe, I think that...
Pick one.
Well, in the periphery of the Eurozone, I would say, first of all, budget deficits were very large. Stocks of public debt were very large. The trouble is that if you front-load the fiscal austerity, that makes the recession worse.
Now, is that experimentation over, you think, in Europe?
Well,
front-loading austerity.
Well, they say that now they're going to backload some of the austerity, but a lot of the damage has been done. You're already in the double-dip recession in most of the periphery of the Eurozone. It's not just a recession. In the case of Greece and Spain, it's a near depression. And now this recession is spreading also to the core of the Eurozone. France, Belgium, Netherlands, Finland are right now in a recession. Then there are the structural problem, rigid labor markets, not enough innovation, not investing into education and training your labor force for a global economy where you have to compete.
And there are knock-on effects.
The recovery is underway. When you look at our future, it used to be people talked a lot about the decline of America. You hear that less now. Does that match your own assessment of the United States' economic future?
I would say yes in the following sense. In absolute terms, of course, the United States is still growing slowly. Unemployment rate is relatively high.
Is there a ceiling on that?
Well, there is a ceiling or not, we don't know. I think that a lot of the unemployment rate is certainly cyclical. But compared, for example, to the rest of advanced economies, you have to recognize the U.S. did some things right. First of all, we cleaned up our banks faster with TARP, and we recapitalized them, so there is credit growth. Right. Secondly, we did very aggressive monetary easing, quantitative easing number 1, number 2, number 3. That led to asset reflation.
So you give high mark to Bernanke.
Yeah, I do. And then we postponed until recently also the fiscal adjustment. Instead, take the United Kingdom and the Eurozone. They have not cleaned up their banks. There was not enough monetary stimulus. There's been early fiscal austerity, and that's why they're in a double-dip recession. So in relative terms, actually, the United States is doing much better. There are also longer-term fundamental things. Of course, the shale gas and oil revolution helps the United States. There is a third manufacturing revolution. It's going to affect productivity in the United States. So there are other long-term forces in which... Those are good things. They're helping the United States.